Welcome. We are live. This is the Disruptors live stream. We're so excited to be here every Friday at 9 a.m. So make sure you check us out. If you're watching us on LinkedIn, we're also on YouTube and Facebook. Make sure to leave a comment, ask us questions. We have an amazing guest today, and I want to give a little introduction. And there's a lot of cool things he's up to. So prepare yourself. So Jason Hopcus is here. He is a catalyst for powerful cultural shift because everyone, directly or indirectly, is affected by mental health. He's working to change and evolve how we view mental health by creating connection among the vulnerable or marginalized. He also serves as the nonprofit president and CEO of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Arapahoe Douglas Counties, and is the founder of the Connection Project, a for-profit company. Jason, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And so give us a little background. I gave a little taste.
You made me sound way more important than I'm going to make myself sound.
You're pretty important. And, I think everyone should know about what you're up to. So give us a little background. How did you get into this space and, kind of tell us more about what you do too?
Sure. So we'll dive right into how I got into this space. So really, I came to working in mental health pretty organically, primarily from my own personal experience, lived experience of mental health struggles. More than a decade ago, I had what I will lovingly now call a breakthrough, but was absolutely a breakdown. Just a series of kind of unfortunate events that led me to a place where I really wasn't certain about what my future looked like. And not to be too graphic here, first thing, but I spent a solid year of my life thinking every day how I was going to kill myself. And from the bigness of the world that I came from, that felt like it was my only option at that time. And I remember having this like mustard seed of faith that kept me kind of going forward. And I will say that walks and baths saved my life, and I literally mean that. But I kept, just walking in faith that if I made it out of this, like, let me use my voice to help other people. The thing I want to underscore about the darkness of that time was, I was a guy that came from a place of privilege. I had a lot of education, experience, supportive family, loved ones who really wanted to help me. And getting help was just nearly impossible. And what I took away from that experience was the reality of, if I can't figure out resources from the place that I'm coming from, imagine how hard it might be to other people who are less resourced or had less opportunity to support themselves. And that really began and became the catalyst for the work that I've spent the better part of the last decade doing. First with the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Arapahoe and Douglas counties. I've worn many hats for NAMI over the years, from being the executive director at NAMI Colorado for a period, served in many board capacities. And really, the work that NAMI does was designed to serve family members and loved ones that are chronic or affected by chronic or persistent mental illness. And the reality is most of us are not necessarily struggling with chronic or persistent mental illness. We may go through what I would call a life transition, loss of a loved one, loss of a job, pet, etc. Take your pick. And really figuring out where to turn in those darkest times is what plagues most people and keeps them from moving forward faster. So my organization, the Connection Project, was founded out of that understanding to recognize that, as humans, it just shouldn't be so hard to get help, because really, in its essence, what the Connection Project's role is, and what my role in life is to help people strengthen and deepen their connection to themselves and others. So really, from that understanding, we have moved forward in building social impact campaigns that look at marginalized or vulnerable communities, and really support them with help and resources that can get them better connected to themselves and others.
And I just want to say too, like, thank you for doing this work that you do. And, I know something you always talk about too is that everyone struggles.
Right.
And, thank you for sharing your struggle, because I think it does, really help to know that, people may look at any of us here and think, oh, they got it all together.
Right.
They're perfect all the time. They got a live stream. But, it's like everyone has their different struggles that they go through.
Right.
And, Jason, how have you seen that impact of, being able to share your struggle or, talk to others about theirs? How have you seen that help other people to know that?
I think back to the point of everyone struggles, which is the tagline of the Connection Project, and
Yeah.
really recognizing that the thing that I thought was failing us as a system was the fact that we assume people are willing to do more to support or help themselves. And the reality is if you look at the world at large, that is not playing out in our reality. Not everybody's going to get in their car and go to therapy or seek out a therapist or take meds or talk to a psychiatrist or check themselves into a facility if something is really catastrophic happening in their lives. And I think, not to criticize any part of the system, but we have just made it too hard. I think you compound that with the fact that, we are all in this age of living life, according to a highlight reel. To your point, Abby, we end up seeing people whose lives look so perfect on what they're presenting to us. And I want to reiterate for anybody that's listening that it isn't real. I'm not saying those moments didn't happen, but many of those moments are staged to look at how we see them in the final product. And the fact of the matter is living that life in comparison of somebody else's highlight reel can really create a lot of deficits in our own lives, and elicit feelings of less than, not good enough, I should be doing more, I should be going further, faster. And I want to be clear that, doing the work, which is what I'm going to call this body or container of things that I've done, it is actual work. It has been a decade of systematic work on dealing with how I got to where I got and unpacking and uncovering the catastrophes that were a result of that and then moving forward in them. And I will tell you, frankly, it's the hardest work I've ever done in my life. I have chosen from that place to recognize that there are a few shortcuts here, and there are some invitations that we can offer people to help themselves in those times of struggle. But the bottom line is, it just shouldn't be so hard. And I think if I could highlight anything in this conversation, it's the reality of helping people understand you are not alone. What you think is unique to you and that you are going through in your life is not necessarily unique. Somebody else has been there or worse and has suffered as much or more than you have.
Right. And it's all about perspective. I mean, it's interesting too, you brought up social media. Do you feel like kind of this, keep it up with everybody else? Does that affect every generation, or do you feel like it's impacting more millennials, more Gen Z? Where do you see that happening?
I think that's a great question. The groups that I see it affecting the most, I think, are our youth, primarily because they were raised with technology from the very beginning. But
Hmm.
I'll go out to dinner and sit in a restaurant and I will see families that every single person is buried in their phone. So I
Yeah.
don't think any age group is immune to this. I think some people are more detached from it. But the fact of the matter is, I think we've all become addicted to technology in a way that, while there are many gifts of being more connected, I don't think it implies a true connection. And I think we have assumed that because we have X number of followers on 3 platforms, 5 platforms, whatever it is, that we are connected, when in real life, that's not the case.
Right. I mean, it's such a good point. I was even having this conversation with my husband yesterday. He's like, why do I even post on Instagram? He's like, I like sharing pictures or like sharing what I'm up to, but who's even looking at it? Like the people I
Right.
really care about, maybe I'll send them a photo if I'm, up in the mountains or on a trip or something cool I'm doing. But I almost see there's a lot of people who are kind of pushing away from that, of like, I don't want everyone to just know everything I'm up to anymore.
Kevin's also
Yeah.
number one fan, though. He likes our stuff 2 days before you do.
We'll encourage him to keep doing that, right?
Yeah, that's good. He can do that.
I think the reality is, and I can't speak for anybody else, but even in my own life,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'll get caught up in scrolling and an hour will have passed. And at some point I will have that realization of, oh my gosh, I've just wasted an hour that I could be doing something that was far more enriching in my life. Now, there are people on and benefits of social media that I want to catch up with, and there is great content to glean. Hence, we're doing this podcast or this live this morning.
Exactly.
But the reality is I don't find most of us are seeking out opportunities to learn on social media. And the trap that I think we get into when we're just stuck in that scrolling is, are we really using this for our benefit, or is it something that's just distracting us or taking us away from times that we could be more present with ourselves or the people that we love in our lives? And I think that's the thing that is missing, and the essence of what is being stripped out of these social media experiments. is real connection. I mean, there is no next to us doing this, the next better connection would be doing this in person. But the reality is there is no replacement for this kind of engagement. You don't get that in social media.
No,
Even
not
if
at
you think you
all.
do.
Yeah, right? Yeah, maybe you think you do, and, even it's just, like, how a lot of people connect, they might not see a human
Right.
for a week or days or who knows how long, So, and then are you having these deeper conversations? Are you just talking surface level? So I know, Jason, you have some really awesome tips that people can do if they're feeling like, "Okay, I'm not feeling 100%," or, there's some easy things I know you've mentioned to me that people can
Yeah,
do on
so
their own.
I go back to the point we talked about earlier. Thank you for teeing it up.
Yeah.
I go back to the point we were talking about earlier in recognizing that some of us get so busy or involved in our day-to-day lives that we forget there are things that we can empower ourselves with to help us. And this was really solidified for me in a conversation about 4 months ago. I do a lot of work with youth, specifically around how do we evolve the definition of mental health among youth, and how do we better support them and their parents with language that can help them communicate in today's world. And I was on a call with a group of really bright youth that helped shape legislation in the state of Colorado. And one of them emailed me after and she said, "Hey, can we have a conversation?" I was like, "Sure, let's find a time to talk." We did. And she said, "You told me on that call that if I would get outside and take a walk and get 15 minutes of sun on my head, it would shape how I felt about my day and it would change my mental health or my mood state." And in that moment, it hit me that here we are having a conversation about something as simple as taking a walk. So from my perspective, there's a couple of things that are happening here. One, for what we've all been through the last 2.5 years, I think systemically and collectively, we are a pot that's about to boil over. I mean, you feel it, it plays out in the news media, you see it on social media. People are just maxed. I
Mhm.
think from that place, more people are talking about their mental health and or their struggle than they ever have. And understanding that has put an additional burden on the system, which was already taxed to begin with. And more people are reaching out for help in numbers that they never have before, with a willingness to talk about things they never would have before, what
Right.
we've all been through. And the reality is we have an amount of demand that the system cannot provide for. So from my perspective, to answer your question, I believe the advent of where we are is recognizing that we are going to have to empower ourselves with tools that can make a difference. So when I talk about those tools, it is things like taking a walk. Did you drink enough water? Can you get 15 minutes of sun on your head? Have you gotten enough sleep? How's your nutrition? Have you fit in exercise? Are you reaching out to loved ones or friends, people that you care about? Simple things that don't cost anything that you have the ability right where you are to take advantage of. I guarantee you, if you're having a bad day and you take 15 minutes to detach, go sit on the front step, stare at the ground, go walk around the block, go check the mail, take your dog out. I don't care. You will feel differently. I'm not saying 5 minutes later you won't feel bad again. And I'm not saying that that is a solution or a salve for people not needing therapy or med interventions or any of those other things that are potentially available. But there are steps that we can take as humans to empower ourselves to, in a moment, heal and feel better.
So, Jason, I have a question about the corporate world. I know you work with leadership teams in large businesses as well. And it occurred to me, now that we're several months out of the, the thing we don't mention.
Right.
and and it really occurred to me the other day that we still live in a society where a lot of people make friendships and even relationships. Obviously, Abby owns a matchmaking company, so we talk about love a lot. But one of the most natural ways to build relationships with people is with coworkers.
Right.
Because whether you have one of these open office floor plans or whether you work at a tech company that is all about interacting, since we've moved into a culture where there's so much remote work and there are teams all over the place. I had a full-time employee that worked for me for a year before we met in person, and she lives here in Colorado
Right.
because it was during the pandemic. And so with the lessening of people having in-person relationships or businesses even having physical office spaces, it seems to me that there's a big shortage of the team building element for sure, but also the socializing and meeting of people when you're kind of relegated to dating apps or trying to get new hobbies. But do you see kind of dissension among teams in corporations because they are not in person anymore? Everybody always talks about the benefits, but I feel like a huge deficit is there.
Yeah, there absolutely is a deficit. And I think that we see that really playing out. I think by and large, when we talk about people struggling at more alarming rates, it is because of this kind of disconnection. Look, I'm an introvert at heart. I can be socially extroverted, but at the end of the day, I would rather be at home doing my thing, not necessarily out and about with people, which is odd because I work with people. I probably shouldn't share that so vocally. But the reality is not everybody is wired for that kind of disconnection. There are some people that truly thrive in that. But by and large, I think many people need that kind of connection to keep them engaged and plugged into, kind of this healthy balance of life. I personally think what we're going to see is some sort of new normal that swings back to a hybrid model. I hope that looks like people being able to connect more in person, getting out there more with teammates in the professional world, and maybe still gives them the opportunity to do some work from home if that's what is allowed for them in their corporate structure. But I think the reality is we went from 0 to 60 so quickly that everybody had to adapt to that. And I think that, while we were in the pandemic, everybody was ready to rush back to our pre-normal, which frankly, if that's what we wanted to rush back to, we failed the experiment. But first and foremost, I think we are still figuring out what the new normal looks like. And I think if and until that happens, we are going to see people continue to struggle for this very thing that you're talking about. We're hardwired for connection.
Right. It is really interesting. And just to bring up kind of an example from my matchmaking company, during the pandemic was when things got crazy busy for me
I,
because, finding connection online is just really hard. It's not as fun, like what we've been talking about. So, if there is someone listening to this that's kind of having trouble, they want to connect more, Jason, are the things you'd recommend for them to do? Like maybe is it to, find a meetup and just go meet some new people or
Yeah, I've been leading peer support groups for people that struggle with mental health conditions for more than a decade now, and I will say, regardless if I'm working with entrepreneurs or youth or middle-aged men or emergency responders, the reality is the baseline of what we are looking for here is connection. What may be different is the nuanced language or imagery we use to talk to a certain group, which is how we've built most of the social impact campaigns I've been involved in. But by and large, if you scratch beneath the surface, it really comes down to that one word connection.
Mhm.
So, from my perspective, what it takes for somebody that's wanting to go that next step, if they're feeling detached, kind of from the world or life, so to speak, is what next step are you willing to take to get connected? Can you pick up the phone and reach out to a friend and say, let's have coffee? Can you go to lunch with somebody? Is there something that you can do that isn't behind your phone, sitting at home, and expecting that life is just magically going to work out? I just don't think it works that way.
Would
And I,
be nice if it did, though.
well, and it's ridiculous to me that we have to remind ourselves at this point, with all we've been through, that, hey, you're going to have to put a little effort into this. And that's why I go back and say, the work that I've done to get to the place that I am, it wasn't easy to get here. I don't think that everybody has to go through what I went through to be in this place. I just have chosen to take my pain and turn it into purpose in a way that I think most people would peter out in doing the work, because it's hard. I mean, it is legitimately the hardest work I've ever done. It is the most fruitful work I've ever done, and I'm grateful that I'm here to be able to share these experiences. But I think unless and until you're willing to step up and show up for yourself, you shouldn't expect change in your life.
Such a good point. Andy, did you have something?
Was this a career pivot for you? You mentioned about 10 years ago. Before that period, did you still work in public works, public policy, coaching kind of stuff, or was
I
this kind of
didn't.
a full shift?
I didn't. Yeah, that's a great question. So my entire start of my career, I've always been very entrepreneurial. I worked in a family business, which was heavy highway road construction for a long time. And from that, also got involved in residential and commercial real estate. I would flip really big properties, and just had a lot of fun doing that. I will always say it was fun until it wasn't. And I got caught in the 2008 crash, which was really what predicated kind of my undoing. I used to have a payroll factoring company, and I had a recruiting firm. I had a bunch of different things, and I was really well diversified and have always had that entrepreneurial spirit. But really, when the economy tanked, I mean, the fact is all of my businesses tanked. What took me down was not necessarily the 2008 financial crisis. It was the fact that I didn't change my lifestyle. So I was not realistic about what happened. And I was of that mindset of, oh, this will get better or this will come in. And it didn't. And when that continues to play out over the course of some years, the erosion of your finances and your mental health and the stress and all of that comes along with it. And I had a really, really big life, fiscally big life. I ended up getting caught with my pants down, and I wasn't prepared for the undoing that came from a lifetime of work kind of going away. And it didn't happen overnight. It literally happened over the course of 3 years before I came completely unraveled. But what that really did for me, because I could spend a lot of time in I used to have this and I don't, when the reality is I have a very rich, full life today. It is different. But the fact of the matter is it created a reality and an awareness for me that just because we're good at something doesn't mean we have to do it. And I think that's really important for people to understand, that you may be good at many things, which I have been good at many things, and have had success at many things, but it doesn't mean that it's my career or my life's work. What evolved for me from that place is really this recognition of being a servant leader, wanting to show up to serve others. I truly think I am a conduit for the information from a higher power. And I'm grateful that I've had the foundation that gives me the credentials to do this work. But the reality is, it wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be sustained. So what happened to me because it was meant to.
Right. And did it take you a while to realize, like, okay, this was meant to happen? I'm sure, when it was happening, maybe that wasn't your first thought, but how did you
Years.
come to that place where you're like, okay, what happened was meant to happen? And
Years.
it's
So I mean,
okay.
if I got into the weeds a little bit here, I mean, I went to therapy 2 times a week. I had coaches. I attended retreats. I did support groups. I led support groups. I got involved volunteering. Literally the first 2 years after my life came unraveled, I volunteered like it was a job. So the role that I'm in as president and CEO at NAMI ADCO, I began by starting as a participant of a support group. And from there, I got trained to lead one. I've led one for the better part of a decade. I became a board member. I became the board president. I moved into a paid role. At some point, I was, a board member of the state organization, and then became their executive director for a time. So it was not just this just happened, and oh, by the way, here you are. It was a systemic willingness to take the next step and to show up for whatever. And I still kind of live my life that way. I feel like the thing that has evolved in the last decade is really this ability to be more present and to live in the flow and recognize that if you come from life from that place, the things that are meant for you will not pass you by. And the things that you have to force for yourself because you think that's the right thing, they're often not your thing.
So, Jason, I have a question about,
Sure.
in the cultural lexicon, there's kind of been this big shift and this hot word lately. People have been using the great resignation. And more often than not, this is sort of entitled Gen Zs that want to quit their job and become an influencer or whatever. But the stakes are kind of low because they don't have very much experience. They probably don't have all that much income. And it's really, I mean, not to put down Gen Z at all,
No.
but
Yeah, we're
I
gonna get some
also,
hate, Andy. Come
it's
on.
okay. There's so many of them watch this, I know. But it's all about, they don't have the attention span to go
They're
past.
updating their LinkedIn page, Andy, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, I have also seen this sort of great shift in people that are a little bit older. And I wonder what you think about, I've always been a big subscriber of the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour thing and what you're a unique expert at. And people also use the terminology area of genius. And for me, my area of genius is very, very specifically food and beverage marketing. I worked in beverage distribution. I owned a brewery. I've done brokering and everything else. And I feel like I have a 1 in a million expertise, like actually in the top couple hundred people in the country
Right.
in that thing. But the pandemic rolled around and I was like, this is not serving me. All of my clients are closed. They're going out of business. I mean, Colorado alone had 80 breweries that went out of business, which is terrifying.
Wow.
But I went on this project to start a media production company, which is what led to Abby and I starting this business actually. But I was really scared that I'm not an expert podcaster or an expert broadcaster. There's a million people out there that are better at this. And I'm walking away from this thing that I am uniquely an expert at in my own resume. I have a family member who was a orthopedic surgeon for the past 30 years.
Right.
And he just said, I'm done with the hospital. I'm done with being quarantined from my family. He quit and he got a job at Starbucks. And he just wants medical insurance. He wants to be around young people. He wants to feel the energy. And he's been doing it for 2 years now. And he's more fulfilled than his medical career. So do you see a lot of people having fear to quit a career as an attorney and become a painter? Maybe that's a little extreme. But as you mentioned, people making a shift to more an area of purpose versus an area of genius or expertise.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think the thing that the pandemic did for us is it opened the door for people to explore something different than what they had been in the grind of, which is why I go back to what we talked about earlier about the failed experiment of wanting to return back to our previous normal. Like it wasn't working. I don't think we have a world of hugely satisfied people. I was reading an article the other day that there are 4 million people a month that are leaving jobs that we rely on and count on, primarily frontline workers, emergency responders. I don't
Crazy.
think anybody's yet really putting the drawing the dotted line here of what that translates into in our experience of showing up in the world. If you think about nurses or policemen leaving those jobs at alarming rate and there's nobody to backfill those jobs, and certainly not at the rate with which they're leaving, we are all systemically being forced to adapt to a downward expectation of service. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it play out in the food industry. Where did all those people go? I don't know. If you worked in food service and you left and you haven't come back, did you get retrained in 2 years? What are you doing now? I'm very curious about this. But in answer to your question, I really think the pandemic opened the door for people to maybe dip their toe in the water of a different kind of richness in life, like the orthopedic surgeon that you're speaking of. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I mean, there are days that I'm like, why am I doing this? I mean, I had one of those moments last week. I mean, and the challenge for me personally is my mission is big. I mean, my mission is simple. I believe I'm here to change how the world sees mental health, and that is not here to criticize the traditional system. But I think if we want to call a spade, what we're doing isn't working. There's not a single statistic that proves suicide rates and ideation is not down. Depression and anxiety rates are not down. Substance use and abuse disorders are not down. I mean, people are struggling at alarming rates, and we don't have a system that can support the demand. That's the reality. So,
Right.
with regards to Great Resignation, I think a lot of it starts with people just saying, I'm done and I can't do this anymore. And yes, it may start with Gen Zs, but I think that is happening across the continuum of people in their careers. And the reality of is life is too short. And I think the pandemic showed us that life is too short to be miserable.
Right. And it's so interesting too. It's like needs to happen? I mean, this is a big question, but what needs to happen to change how people view mental health and how it's treated in the medical system? I guess in your dream world, Jason, how would we change?
If we were looking at changing the traditional mental health system today, I think we have to first start by recognizing mental health and mental illness are not the same thing.
Hmm.
And mental health is something we all have. If you have a brain, you have mental health. And
Hmm.
the reality is things happen in life. You can go through setbacks and transitions that may not be your brightest hour, that may be a setback for you, that you don't show up in the way that you wanted to or had hoped to. It doesn't mean it's going to define the rest of your life. You asked me a minute ago about the trajectory of me coming into this life. And the reality is, Abby, over the last decade, I bet I spent more than half of that beating the shit out of myself for the mistakes that I made in my undoing in a very short period in a long life. And the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is until you can pull back and recognize that things happen for a purpose and a reason, I think we likely keep ourselves stuck. We create walls for ourselves that don't need to exist. And literally the only one that has the ability to take the bricks off the wall brick by brick is you. So, if we talk about evolving the traditional system, I think one, we have to create a narrative that supports we all have mental health.
Mhm.
Recognize that from that place, people struggle, and being able to meet them at that place and recognize that they're not alone. And then I also think that we have to understand that not everybody is going to engage or be willing to show up for the traditional system as it stands. Not everybody's going to do therapy. Not everybody's
Right.
going to take meds. And the fact of the matter is that's kind of been the system that we subscribed. We assume people are willing to do more, go further, go faster to help themselves. And I don't think that's true. And I think that there is a resignation and understanding that not everybody wants to get better, but there are people that do. And there are traditional systems that can support you, but there are also things that you can do to empower yourselves. And I think from self empowerment, we have the ability to make a lot of change and impact in our own lives with little or no cost. Maybe some effort and energy, but doesn't have to necessarily be the hardest thing you've ever done. I mean, we can all
Right.
walk around the block, right? I mean, unless you're
Yeah.
limited. I don't want to say by and large, but I mean,
Mhm.
there are things we can all do that many of us just
Right.
need a reminder that, hey, I could do this and I might feel better.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Greg.
Andy. There you go.
So, one of the things that we ask all of our guests on this, because this is our disruptor stream about how they disrupt,
Right.
you mentioned, I mean, we can all gather that you have an immense amount of empathy and capacity to do this kind of work. And you obviously have a big honesty from your personal experience and now the bandwidth to reach tons of people. But I'm curious, you mentioned that you work with first responders and men and children and business owners. What do you think is the special sauce when it comes to you connecting with people versus other people in the field or the way other organizations are structured?
That's a really great question. And I think it really comes down to I see people first. When you show up from that servant leadership position of really recognizing that I am here to serve others, this work is not about me. I again am a conduit for this initiative and this effort. And I'm so grateful to be able to serve. So, what really evolved when we started the Connection Project, recognizing that it was something that could, benefit everybody. You can't market to everybody. It's too big. So I literally struggled for a couple of years after we started the organization to figure out how are we going to do this. And the first entree was recognizing that there was, let's take a look at vulnerable or marginalized communities. What are those communities that have really high depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, suicidal rates, substance use, misuse disorders, etc. And that data exists, and you start looking at that, you can glean pretty quickly, like, what are the groups that you could go in and make a difference on. And really what that started with is just saying, okay, let's find out who are the community leaders or the way makers that do this work. Let's start talking to them in this kind of format and get their ideas about how do we change this. From there, what are the resources that we can connect them with? And really from doing just that in a broad scale platform that we would create a digital marketing campaign around and had phenomenal success with many, many campaigns, both regionally and nationally. Just recognize people really crave this sort of information. And it tells me we are starved for connection. And really, the only thing that is required is to show up and in a way that aligns with the communities that you're wanting to serve and be a conduit for resources. Like, I
Hey,
don't feel
take
like I'm
notes,
here.
people.
I don't feel like I'm here to build, support programs and all of those things.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm here to host conversations and empower other organizations that do those programs really well with data that supports this is what people tell us they're needing, and here's all the data that supports it. I have a phenomenal amount of data on the social impact campaigns that we've built, and I can tell you exactly what people are struggling with. And I don't know what the magic sauce is and why I do it better, but I am really good at figuring how do we target the communities we want to reach and reaching them with a lot of efficacy.
Love it. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, Jason. We're
Thank
so
you.
happy that we get to support you. And we always like to end these episodes with something a little lighter.
Okay.
What is something you're celebrating right now, whether personally, professionally? What might that be?
Something that I'm celebrating. So we have a new house and
Hmm.
moved in the end of March.
Congrats.
And I'm kind of particular about how things are. We had our yard
Yeah,
redone, and I will
exciting.
say we have the most spectacular yard. One of
Ooh,
our neighbors walked by the other day and says it looks like the botanical gardens. So I'm
wow.
really proud of that, and I celebrate the fact that I can walk outside and literally sit in one of my orange Adirondack chairs and just like be in immense nature and beauty and enjoy all of the gifts that we've been given.
Amazing. Can you send us a picture of the yard? I feel like we need to
I'm
see it
happy to.
now. If you let us, maybe we can put it in the comments.
I would love to.
Awesome. Andy, anything else from you over there?
No, I think this has been great.
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
We're so glad we could share what you're up to with our audience. And last thing is, can you share where people can follow you, get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so a couple of things. If you want to find me on social media, on Instagram, I'm at Jason Hopcus. My website is www.realpeoplereallife.org. I will say that website is going through a transition and a revamp, so there is more new content coming very soon. There is much to add. And then if somebody wants to reach out to me directly, whether it's for coaching, consulting, something that I might can help them with, my email is really simple. It's jason@realpeoplereallife.org. I'm very responsive and, again, subscribe to whoever's meant to show up is going to show up. So if somebody has a question or wants to reach out, by all means do, and I will get back with you.
Awesome. Yeah, please reach out to Jason, follow him. And we are excited that we get to support you
The
in
pleasure is mine. I
changing the
appreciate
world
this.
one
Thank
step
you.
at a time. Have a great Friday, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Cheers.